Let me start with a definition of what I think discernment is. First off, it's the art of relating to God in freedom so that I can be and do the magis. So that I can, and I'll explain that in a little more detail as I go along. So discernment is the art of relating to God in freedom so that I can be and do magis, the more, the greater. And it's important to keep in mind that magis, more, is an Ignatian term which does not have to do with quantity, but with quality. How can I be my best self? How can we be our best selves? Not in our most selves, although that's often the case, but in terms of the quality of our life and what we try to do for others. So what is that relating to God business? It's about prayer. And one of the best, well, I made this definition up, but it includes what St. Anselm said about God as being the one who, than which nothing greater can be thought, the sort of philosophical idea, but it's also combined with another idea of a Dominican, Herbert McCabe, that I'd like to steal things from, who talked about prayer as a waste of time. There's no utilitarian value to prayer. It is, and he goes on at length and in great humor to talk about what a waste of time prayer is and how difficult it is for us who are part of busy utilitarian societies to waste time, to smell the flowers and to look at the clouds and to have time that's wide open and do nothing at all except be with the one who created us, who loves us, and wants to bless us. The picture of the little girl in the corner there is to remind us that it's important for children to waste time, to be bored. And it's important for adults to be bored. Rather than filling up our days with Twitters and chats and YouTube videos and emails and all the things which we think make our lives important and significant, we should be taking time to air ourselves out. I mean, we have to do a lot of those things, but we cannot multitask, contrary to what the world tries to tell us. It's psychologists who are worth their salt say that it's impossible to multitask. Even when we convince ourselves that we can, our productivity goes way down. But instead, we would do well to waste time and to let our creativity emerge rather than keeping it covered up with all the busyness of what we're involved with. That wasn't supposed to happen. The other thing I wanted to talk about prayer as important is that my images of God are all inadequate. And every time I think I can start to talk about God in a meaningful way, it means that I'm not talking about God, but it means I'm talking about an image that I have created. It's about a false image of God. It's an idol that I probably have made in my own image and likeness. God cannot be bound by our limitations and our capacities and our images. So that when we pray, we should be in touch with the one who's always receding before us as the horizon recedes. And God's the great holy mystery that we cannot contain. And that's who we try to meet and be in relationship with when we are in discernment. The second thing I mentioned in the definition about relating to God in freedom has two dimensions. One is to be free from our human propensity to seek riches, honors, and to be proud of ourselves, which many of you will recognize as a theme from the spiritual exercises, in which the strategy of Satan, the strategy of the enemy of our joy, the strategy of the enemy of our human happiness is to tempt us through riches and honor so that we become full of pride. And pride, of course, is the fundamental sin which separates us from God more than anything else. It seems to me we can maybe talk about that which limits our freedom in two ways. One, we can talk about the constraints that bind us, which usually have to do with thinking, oh, I can't do that. We don't have enough money to do that. We don't have enough talent to do that. I'm not capable of doing that. We think of ourselves as too limited. Or we think that the sky's the limit. We can do anything. And we launch ourselves into a world of fantasy in which I, for example, would love to be able to fly with my own wings. Especially in COVID times, I wouldn't have to mess with airplanes. So we all have these kinds of fantasies. I'm going to learn Greek at this point in my life so that I can be a better preacher. Well, I'm not going to learn Greek. I'm not going to have a body like the movie stars. I need to be where I am, to be free from all these kinds of false images of myself and of God, and instead embrace in freedom the truth, which is that I'm limited, but that I have lots of possibilities and can do lots of things. We enter into our freedom so that we can be like our Maker. We're made in the image and likeness of God, and so we're special human beings who can do all kinds of great things when we give ourselves the chance. We can be like Jesus in generous service. We need to remember Jesus is the image of the unseen God, and he's the revelation of God, and when we see him in action, we see the Father in action, we see God in action, serving. But not serving as someone who's from on high and who condescends to be with us, although we can talk about God condescending in Jesus. It's much more important to remember that God is in solidarity with us. We're meant to be free to be with others, to be with God as God is with us. So, well, that's the point. I don't need to beat that over the head any more than I already have. God is a servant. God is in solidarity with us. And because we're made in his image, we can do the same. What I mean by, excuse me, when I talk about the magis, the more, it involves being even who I am even more than I already am. Who am I? I'm a beloved child of a Father who is God. I'm a companion of Jesus. I'm a temple of the Holy Spirit. I've been made to be special. Each one of us is unique and never to be repeated. So I need to be that more and more, not trying to conform myself to what everyone thinks that I should be like, but to be much more who I am in my uniqueness and my specialness. But of course, we all know that we're sinners. We don't live up to our dreams, our expectations of ourselves, our capacities. We consciously do horrible things. We choose to do those kinds of things. And yet God continues to love us and to embrace us as the prodigal father in spite of our creative ways of sinning. But we've all been baptized into being the holy, prophetic, and royal people of God. We're a church, we're a community of people who are like us. And we need to rely on that and be more and more who I am. You got the point. You're smart people here, you all got the point. Okay. The magis, I'm missing this. So magis also involves doing what Jesus did. And I don't know where that, oh, here we go. I got my slides out of order. The Majas includes being who I am, but also doing what Jesus did. He set us free to be able to do all kinds of wonderful things. The first thing to say about Jesus is that he was obedient. But he was not obedient in the sense of being a dead stick or a staff in an old man's hand to be carried around and to do exactly what someone told him to do. He was obedient in the sense of the original sense of the word in Latin, audire. It has to do with acting on account of what I've heard. So Jesus, before he did anything, always listened in prayer to the Father. And at the beginning of his life, he listened to what his parents said. That line about when he was in Nazareth, that he was obedient to his parents. But it was a different kind of obedience than we're used to, because while he obeyed his parents, he also went on and stayed in Jerusalem to be obedient to the Father. So he was listening always before he acted. And that's a very important dimension of discernment. It has to do with being obedient to what I hear, but it also means to be listening a lot to all the things that I know. And so those of you who are religious superiors, I'm sure have had the experience of knowing that you listen to people a lot better than they do when you're trying to help them come to a good decision. So we have to listen as Jesus listened. We have to choose downward mobility as Jesus chose downward mobility, in the sense that Dean Brackley used in his there's a studies pamphlet that he wrote about that. Jesus chose to be poor, he chose to be vulnerable, and he chose to be humble. And we need to do that ourselves. We need to live simple lives. We don't need all the things we think we need, and we need to be in solidarity with the people who are poor. That this does not mean to be destitute, but we need to not let things determine who we are and define us. We need to be vulnerable in the sense that we allow ourselves to be disdained by a world which hates us, which looks down upon us, which is embarrassed about us because of how we live our lives. What does that mean? The world thinks that people who are chaste are fools. They should be getting as much sex as possible, and we should be proud to be looked down upon because of our chastity. We should be proud to be looked down upon because we choose to live in a way that's sustainable, rather than jetting around the world all the time and going to fancy restaurants and hotels and living the lifestyle of the rich and famous, because it's not good for us and it's not good for the world in which we live. And the most important fundamental part of this of downward mobility is the humility of the truth, to know that I'm a creature, to know that I'm not the creator, to know that it's not all about me, but instead it's all about the Father, it's about God. The last dimension of doing the Majas and doing what Jesus did is to love in a paschal way, to freely die, because love always involves death. Herbert McCabe, that Dominican philosopher that I mentioned, says that if you're not a lover, you're dead. If you're alive, you have to love. But if you love, they will kill you. And isn't that what happened to all the prophets? Because they loved God, because they loved the people of Israel, they suffered and they were put to death. Because Jesus loved, he was put to death. But this is not to concentrate on the horrible, painful dimensions of death. It's to say it's a reality that we need to embrace if we want to live. Die to my own way of doing things in order to live in a deeper way. Okay, so now what I want to do is go to your questions and what you want to, what more you want to learn. The ability to discern movements of the Spirit within different groups, particularly the prophetic voices in the group. Um, yes, I think that, just to say, discernment in a group is challenging, and it's also a great grace, because you have to pay attention to the people that you agree with and the people that you disagree with. And the important thing to always keep in mind that there's one spirit that's speaking to us. There's one spirit who is trying to communicate to us. That's the fundamental orientation that we always need to have in any kind of an experience of discernment, but especially in a group, is to say, when there's two different opinions that are very strongly held, that means it can mean a couple of different things. One, it can mean someone's not listening, and it can also mean that there's a truth that's underneath all the truths, and that you have to seek that. But you're seeking it together. And that's the thing you always have to keep in mind, that this is not, I have the truth and I'm going to manipulate the group into going along with me, or that I don't know anything about anything, and so I'm going to go along with what everybody else says. But it's to be true to what I'm hearing and to keep saying that, but also in a respectful way so that I listen to what the other people in the group have to say. Let's see. So, Cecilia, does that answer your question? I can't see. Okay, you're okay. Okay. So, from Marcus, I meant good and bad leadership. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Could you explain that, Marcus? Just unclick for a second and ask your question.
Well, thank you, Father. People used to differ between good and bad leadership. Regarding the good leadership, I think you have highlighted the points here. Perhaps there are also characteristics of bad leaderships. Perhaps it's just the opposite what you have said before, or perhaps you know more about the characteristics of bad leadership.
Okay. I'd say the characteristic of bad leadership is not to listen. It's to try and impose an agenda. It's to come to the meeting with your mind already made up about what's going to happen. A bad leadership lets things keep spreading out and never comes to a conclusion. Sometimes you have to stop a process and say, this is as far as we can go to this point. It would be nice for us to come to a conclusion, but we can't. It seems to me good leadership is about closure. It's about coming to a discernment. It's about admitting that you're limited. It's about admitting that this is one step in the way. And bad leadership would be about saying this is set in stone for all time, that my way is the best way and we're going to do it. But it's also, bad leadership is also being controlled by an unthoughtful and unhelpful majority. Just because people have all the votes doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. So in general, I would say good leadership is being like Jesus, and bad leadership is being like the enemy of our human nature. It means to try and do something because it's going to be profitable to us, because it's going to make us look good, and because it's going to make us feel good about ourselves, and we'll be able to look up to ourselves. So I think in the sexual abuse crisis, you see classic examples of bad leadership, and we need to learn from that. Eulalia, how to adopt discernment for group decision in view of the mission. There's some very good things which have been written that I'll talk about in just a couple minutes, and when I get to the bibliography. There's some articles that you can read, some books that you can read about this that I'll mention that I think will be helpful to you. How to reconcile the dream and the needs of the moment in the process of discernment. Our dreams are unlimited because we're made in the Maker's image. We have more dreams than we can possibly accomplish. There's more questions on this list than I can possibly go through in the time that I have, or that you could do in this whole time. So dreams are really great. They're really important. They're really necessary for opening us up into a broader world. But at the same time, they can become fantasies. They can become ways in which we how to say, make the process impossible because we're so fixated on ourselves. So what we need to do is dream, certainly, but dream within our limits. So that's what I'd say, Teresa. Ernesto, to review and update the ways. I think Mark Ravitsa is going to talk about the examen, and so that'll touch on Ernesto's question. Mary Bear, and how to cultivate a culture of discernment among members. The most important thing you can do is start to pray together, to make sure everybody is praying, to encourage people to have a spiritual director, because if the members of the group are not praying, then there's no way you can be in touch with God, with what God has in mind for us. So that's a sine qua non, that everybody has to pray. That's why I mentioned that in the definition. Everybody has to be moving toward freedom, which of course is the fruit of prayer. But the group has to know you have to know the members of the group so that you know what everyone's limits and capacities are. So there has to be a dimension of self-revelation, a capacity to talk to one another, and share with one another on a deep level, because what's more important than talking about God? So that's what I would say, Mary, about how, and you know, every group is different, and so you need to cultivate your own ways of doing that. So let's see, Vernon. Discernment is not so much about getting in touch with one's feelings as with getting in touch with the interior movements. It would be nice to talk about this and the difference between the two. Yes, okay. Feelings are human experiences that just happen to us. If I slammed a hammer on my hand right now, you would hear me yelling and screaming and being very angry at myself for doing something stupid. Feelings are spontaneous human experiences over which I have no control. The movements I experience are often related to those feelings, but they're a little bit different in the sense that they're how to say, this is a big topic, Vernon, and just to say, there's the feelings that just happen. There's the movements that happen over time, and I get to know that they happen in relationship to knowing who I am. So for me, for example, on the Enneagram, I'm a number 1, which means that anger is my favorite emotion. That's where whenever anything happens, the first thing I do is get angry. Now the anger, I've learned, is hiding something that's important to me. It's underneath what's important. And that's where the movements are. The movements are underneath the feelings, the surface feelings, and they have to do with kinds of persistent, long-term things which are going on. So that the sentiments that are underneath me, underneath my anger, underneath the feelings, have to do with vulnerability, of idealism, of wanting the best, of wanting to so much that I'm always disappointed in what happens and that I get angry about it. Once I know what those kind of underlying sentiments in me are, when I'm in a group and some things are going on, I can pay attention to how I'm being moved at a deeper level than just the sentiments that I'm saying, oh, I can't believe how boring this is. I can't believe how stupid this is. I can't believe we're wasting our time doing this. And all the things that I get angry about in a group, when I look at what's going on underneath, then I can be much more compassionate and pay much more attention to the way in which God is touching and moving those interior and much deeper movements in order to lead me into the light. So I hope that helps, Vernon, but that's a great topic that that I think we could spend a whole day on. So how to move from personal discernments to more communal discernments. We all need to have the better we get at personal discernment, the more capable we are of entering into group discernment with other people. And so that's just something to keep in mind and to go with. So, okay. I'm going to stop with the questions now and then go back to, if I can figure out how to do that. I'm going to go share my screen again. And then I'm going to go back. Yeah, okay, that worked. I think it worked. Marcus, give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen again. No.
We don't see the screen.
No, we don't see the screen.
Okay, let me go back. Get out of the show. Go back here. You know, I think maybe what happened was that my time is up. So I've somehow lost. How about now? Did that work?
No, not yet.
How about now?
Yes, now. Thank you.
Okay. You can teach an old dog new tricks. So let me go to the bibliography that I want to show you. These are mostly classic texts. They are, so when I made this list and I started to pay attention to it, the first thing that embarrassed me was that there were no women on the list. So I had to go quick yesterday looking for women to put on the list. And my searches didn't do very well. I found that one article, which was excellent, and so it gets #1 pole position, but the only other things that I found were a master's theses that no one had ever published or done anything with. There are some things that are good, I think. They didn't come up in the search engine that I was using, Google Scholar, which maybe says something about bias. This is a topic that maybe you can send me some articles that you know about that women have written, because I think it's important. Why is it important? Women's experience is different than men's experience. And needs to be taken more seriously. So as I read Christina Astorga's article yesterday, I was impressed by that it was just more gentle and more inclusive than some of these classics that were written mostly by people who were in a generation ahead of me. And you can tell by the dates that basically what seems to have happened is there was a big emphasis on discernment and communal discernment right after Vatican II, and not much has happened since. Partly because these were great articles and great books, but maybe partly because we haven't reflected enough on our experience. So this article by Bill Berry from The Way, it is based on his experience of doing communal discernment with different groups of religious communities on different topics. So it has some helpful practical suggestions. It's short and to the point and sweet, and so I recommend it. John Futrell was one of the first people to write anything at all about discernment. His dissertation from the Gregorian was about being an apostolic community of love. It was based on the deliberation of the first fathers. He wrote some reflections in 1970 that are still important and helpful. And this was at the very beginning of taking discernment seriously, more seriously than it had been taken before. Timothy Gallagher is a oblate of the Blessed Virgin. I think he's in Denver. He's written a number of very helpful and accessible books about discernment of spirits. Perhaps because he's not a Jesuit, I think they're easy to understand, and there are lots of examples. He wrote a book about the rules for the first week of the exercises that I didn't put in this bibliography because it's a newer book and it was more about the first week than it is about life in general. But I think his books are helpful, and I recommend. Actually, I recommend whatever he writes. At least the things I've read were really worthwhile. Franz Moires wrote a very interesting article. It's the text of a talk that he gave. And Vernon, I think it really addresses your questions much from a psychologist's point of view in a very helpful way to talk about, our own feelings, our own sentiments that both help and get in the way of a discernment process. So let me. It's kind of long, but it's really worthwhile, and I found it very helpful. Ladislas Orsi is a Hungarian Jesuit who's been at, I think he's actually, this is, talk about abuse of the elderly. He's going to be 100 years old next year, and I think he's still teaching at Georgetown. He still has a class. He has a book that came out in a couple months ago. I would have put it on the list, except I don't have a copy of it, and I don't want to recommend something that I haven't read. So he's a canon lawyer, but he also has written a great deal about communal discernment. And this was one of the first things he wrote. It would be interesting to see what he wrote 50 years later. But it has a lot of practical as well as theological points. And then Jules Toner, I think, is the king of discernment. He wrote a book, this book, The Commentary on the Rules for Discernment, which I think is a sine qua non for someone who wants to take discernment seriously. It's kind of like a science textbook in which he goes through all the things which St. Ignatius said in a very systematic way, and comes to a number of significant and important, interesting questions, results. It's not an easy read. You should take your time and read in it, but it's very thought-provoking and helpful. Then shorter articles that he has written about communal discernment. The first one there, The Deliberation That Started the Jesuits, is a translation of the text of the Deliberation of the First Fathers, which is how St. Ignatius and the first companions went around about the first communal discernment that they did together. And it's a very helpful article. And then this method kind of teases that out and gives you very practical steps for going through the discernment process.